Welcome to Infinity Nerd. I'm your host, John Haycock, and I'm here with my co host, Mike Smith.
How's it going?
And today we are going to talk about the new episode of Loki titled The Variant. So we're going to start off non spoilers. Um, for those who haven't watched it yet, I suggest you go watch it after you see the non spoiler part before you finish the rest of this podcast. Um, what are your thoughts, Mike?
I liked that because obviously we're talking about spoilers from episode 1 to 2, but we're not into spoilers yet, but episode 1 spoilers are fine. Um, I like that we saw how in the first episode, so this episode for me, I was like, why is Loki acts different, I will just say that, than
Mm-hmm.
what you would expect. And for a minute, okay, a little bit longer than a minute, like, it kind of bothered me while I was watching the episode. I was like, okay, what is going on? But then I thought back to the first episode, and it made me realize this guy thought he was burdened with glorious purpose, and then saw his whole life flash in front of his eyes, essentially, right?
Yeah,
And saw that his life amounted to basically nothing. I mean, the biggest contribution he had on or impact he had was assembling the Avengers,
which was
it,
supposed to happen.
which was supposed to happen.
I
But
mean,
that's
we
like his
discussed it previously that he was just a stepping stone.
exactly like he didn't really matter, and I think that really humbled him in a
Yeah,
way
for
and
sure.
took him down a step. Without giving too much away, he does act a bit different. At first, I'm like, is this supposed to be? I mean, I know it's supposed to be Loki number two, not Loki number one, as we've come to know. But
Right.
at the same time, like when you watch, because I just rewatched Avengers recently, and I'm like, he's so evil and devious in that one, the
Yeah.
first Avengers. And then we see him in the second episode of this. I'm like, that's not the same character. This is supposed to be almost night and day. I mean, they didn't give a time frame of how much time has passed, which is
Right.
another reason he could be a little bit different. Um,
But I mean, they also talked about in the first episode that time is different in the TVA.
that's true. That's true. And like I said, I almost think it exists outside of time somehow, which is why I
So
think magic can't work there because of the fact it would take time to conjure something.
right.
That's my thoughts.
So on that topic, actually, this is still spoiler free. Um, I came across a post on Instagram the other day, and I believe I sent it to you, but it was that question if the TVA was in the quantum realm.
I don't know if you sent that to me. If you did, I don't remember seeing it. I would say no. That's a great theory. I don't know anything about the TVA from the comics personally. Just
Yeah.
like a disclaimer, I don't know anything about it.
Right.
That's a great theory because it would explain exactly kind of how it exists differently as far as time moves. I just think it's a space outside of time and space, a place outside of time and space where they operate. And
So
um,
it's essentially just in that little space. So there's time, space, and it's just right in between.
yeah, but not touching either side, like in
Right.
operation. It's just right there. It's right there. It's not touching the edges, making
Mm.
everything get affected by it. But then they jump out to touch the edges to fix things. Speaking of operation, saving time itself. I'm looking forward to finding out more about the TVA over time because I feel like because I remember I actually read recently that Kevin Feige, who we all know is the head of Marvel,
Mhm.
the genius that he is, and he said something along the lines that Loki's going to have the biggest impact of the show so far. That's going to actually like last.
Yeah.
So I have theories on that, and my theory is that, and I this hasn't happened as far as I know yet, but so this is not a spoiler. I think what's going to end up happening, you know how I think eventually a time is going to get too far into the danger zone where it branches off and it's too
Oh,
late.
and hits that red line.
Yes, I
Yeah.
think that's going to happen, and then what's going to happen is it's going to create at least another timeline, but maybe even more, depending on how crazy Loki gets. So we'll see. But I think for me, this episode was more of a this is just how things are now with Loki. Because again, I
Hmm.
was expecting Loki from Avengers, not a good version of Loki or any kind of thing like that, or a different version of Loki,
Right.
because I still wouldn't call him good. But
I mean,
it's
he's
just
done
different.
some questionable things for sure. And I
Oh yeah.
mean, even the stuff that he was shown, he didn't do. So technically, really, the only bad thing he's ever done was invading New York. I
And
mean,
he
he
almost took over Asgard.
Right, but he never did. So
Yeah.
that's another question.
Yeah, what's
Um,
up?
what do you think happened since now Loki escaped and that all those events that happened in the Dark World, where Thor's mom dies and he gets put into custody and stuff like that? I mean, did his mom really die now? Like,
That is a fantastic question.
is she
Um,
now alive? Is Odin still alive? Like,
at
because
this
if
very
that
moment,
didn't happen, I don't think if well,
because it's
actually no, I don't
2012.
think she is alive because of
Let's say because
Ragnarok.
it's 2012. But yeah, Ragnarok still happened, which means that all the other stuff had to have happened.
Yeah.
So, but if you look at it like from Endgame, when they said, "Oh, well, if you just put the stones right back where you found them at the exact time, it won't affect anything," that would imply that they put Loki back where he was. So maybe they went back in and they reset the timeline using one of their charge things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so that way he didn't escape. But then that's the thing that sucks about when you have any kind of time traveling show. The more you think about it, the more insane it drives you because you realize it's so implausible.
Yeah.
With that being said, I love time travel shows. I just do. It doesn't really matter which one it is. Back to the Future, it doesn't matter. It's just
Mm-hmm.
fun to see all these different combinations of situations. But again, the more you think about it, you just have to give yourself a moment and say, I know this can't be as plausible as they're making it seem. It's there's a certain word I'm looking for. The benefit, not the benefit of the doubt, but there's a certain word I'm looking for that basically just you have to stop believing for a second. Just say, you know what? I'll let it slide. You know what I mean? Like just
Just
let
keep
it
an open
happen.
mind.
Yeah, because I mean, otherwise you're just gonna kick yourself the whole show. You just gotta be along for the ride.
Let's go to spoiler territory now. Huh?
I'm good with that.
Cool. So it opens up at that Renaissance fair,
Mm-hmm.
Oshkosh, Wisconsin. Oshkosh.
I just remember it saying Wisconsin, but I believe you.
They go back in time into the 80s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And of course, the TVA shows up looking for the variant. They get, that aura on their little device. So they track it to Wisconsin. And then the best part of that whole scene is when I Need a Hero starts playing.
Yes. Yes.
And
The
then,
music has been actually pretty good for the series
yeah,
so far. I will say that it was not expected. It wasn't
it's
like Guardians where you expect a good soundtrack like
right.
that.
No, this is a nice surprise where they've been putting in good music.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I fully agree.
Um, and then she mind controls that TVA commander, and she starts killing all her guys with her.
Yes, Hunter C20, I believe.
Okay, yeah, I didn't know what her name was. Anyway, so that scene ends. The commander C20 ends
Mm-hmm.
up passing out, and she, the variant takes her away through the portal, and then that ends the scene. And then uh, the next scene pops up with Loki with his feet at a desk, and
Yes.
what was her name? Miss Minutes.
Minutes. Yep. She's
Yeah,
voiced by Tara Strong, I want to say her name is, who's a very famous voice actor.
but yeah, she's like questioning him and stuff like that. But I took down some notes about one of the questions that she asked because I thought it was super uh, important to understand how this works because of what could happen. So she asks a question that goes, "What happens when a Nexus event branches past the red line?" So, like what you were talking about, how you want to see something hit that red line,
I do.
and he's being a smart ass and stuff like that. She's like, "Come on, Loki, what's the real answer?" And he goes, "It's when the TVA can no longer reset a Nexus event, which would lead to the destruction of the timeline and collapse reality." So I wonder if, eventually something like that might happen.
It's
Uh,
possible.
which would be cool to see how they bring everything back together. I mean, I know it might play into Doctor Strange, but
It supposedly is, but I don't think Loki himself is in Doctor Strange. So I'm thinking the effects of whatever happens in Loki affects Doctor Strange. Whereas
and
with WandaVision, Wanda herself is in it.
I
And also
wonder,
like Spider-Man too.
yeah, I wonder about that because Spider-Man actually releases this year, and Doctor Strange doesn't come out for what, next year or 2 years?
May. I think it's next May.
Next May.
My thought is like, let's say, so it's the multiverse of madness.
Hmm.
If the time variants know of the multiverse and that people can potentially hop over, which I would imagine, I think they even mentioned it in Doctor Strange, which came out 5 years ago, where something about a multiverse. And if they could travel through multiverses back then, how does the time variant protect against that? Or did they just care about the timeline?
I'm not sure. I think they would just care about the timeline.
Well, what I'm trying to think is like, so we're saying that Loki's all time focused, pretty much, right?
Right. Yeah.
Spider-Man, we won't say WandaVision because that didn't really mess with time or multiverse related things. She just happens to be in the movie.
Hmm.
But Spider-Man is heavily rumored to have multiverse properties, right?
Right.
And then so is, I mean,
Yeah.
Doctor Strange's title is multiverse. So if this is supposed to tie in, and even if the lines go red, it doesn't create a multiverse. It'll create an alternate timeline, but I wouldn't call it quite a multiverse. The same way that we've seen.
I don't
like,
think it would be an
Flash.
alternate timeline because there's only one timeline.
Unless it goes past the red line. Do you think
Some.
it's going to be? Well, I'm just trying to figure out like where does Loki and Doctor Strange connect? If this is multiverse over here, and this is the timeline over here, what could happen in the timeline area that's going to create a multiverse or expand or touch on? Like, how is it going to impact Doctor Strange? That's my thoughts, is how to connect them. I mean, obviously we don't know yet, but I'm just saying that's the thing that keeps going through my brain is that Loki's supposed to be impactful. We know it's supposed to be part of this multiverse thing, but yet it seems like it's so heavily focused on just time. And maybe it's because it's still early in the season. I don't know.
So again, when it hits that red line, though, that's just to the point where they can't reset it.
Right. So if
So
they do that, then they have two branches now.
I don't.
You know what I mean?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but
You're
uh,
wrong.
um, Mobius, I think, says something about that it just gets worse and worse and basically just destroys itself, basically.
I would keep in mind that everything we're being told by Mobius, especially since he's works for the TVA, it might be one-sided. It might not be how actually things are. It might be either how he was trained or told to respond.
Yeah.
And maybe he's wrong. That's another option. I mean, if it hasn't happened before to our knowledge, it doesn't sound like it has, right? I could be wrong.
I don't think so.
Because they've been so good and diligent about it, then what would happen if that happened? He would have no idea. If it never happened before, they have no way to know. That's what I'm saying. Time travel is so, like, the more you think of it, you're more like, but this can't happen if this happens. Like, the whole is free go live thing. It's
I wonder if they've gotten like close, but nothing has ever happened.
Yeah, and it actually got close when they were in the tent. And then when I realized what was actually happening with the red line, I was like, he let him get that close? Like, that's a bit much. Like, I get he kind of believes in Loki, but I was just like, I'd be like 5 seconds max. Like, we have 5 seconds or units, I think they called it, before we do anything like that, before we just cut it off. But yeah, I don't know. But it was really cool in that fight scene to see, obviously the variant, mind control Hunter's C20.
Yeah.
And see kind of it's a whole different power than what we've seen at first. So when my wife and I were watching it, she said, "Is this? I thought he had to have the Mind Stone to do this." And I said, "This isn't the same Loki." They even had said, I believe it was in the first episode of this one, that there's a lot of different variants out there with different looks, different personalities, and different abilities and powers. Like, I'm kind of paraphrasing here. I'm not quoting, but that's okay for having a different power, and it makes it more interesting because if they had literally the exact same powers, it just isn't as fun to watch.
Yeah. But it wouldn't be from a different timeline, though, correct? It's a different dimension.
We don't know that. That could be where the multiverse comes in, actually, is maybe she's from another Earth. I don't think they specified that it's from different timelines, because technically there's one timeline. Yeah. Right? So she'd have to be from the multiverse, and maybe that's how it breaks loose. It isn't from Loki's actions. I mean, maybe Loki's actions are part of it, but the variant's actions in coming from another universe.
Mm-hmm.
So the multiverse already exists. It's established as early as Doctor Strange that there is a multiverse. I want to say Ancient One says something about a multiverse. which I don't think she would say if there wasn't already one. And we already know there's one because of comics, and then we see
And
the
then they
name
even talk about it in Endgame
and Spider-Man,
and Spider-Man.
Far From Home,
Hmm.
because he's from the multiverse. Mysterio is, but he
Yeah.
obviously wasn't. Um, Although, one side note, I do like that he said he came from Earth. I think it was 616, which is what the Marvel Cinematic Universe's number is or something, because they have different Earth numbers.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
I do want to bring this up while you're kind of looking over your notes. Is
Yeah.
also Loki. I think another reason why he's acting so different is because he's so motivated now, knowing he has no place in the timeline, that he just wants to get a meeting with the timekeepers if he cooperates with them to take down the variant to see if he can make himself exist. He's in it for his own self-preservation at the end of the day. As
It's
far as I'm
either
concerned.
for that or so he can rule over time.
That too. But either way, it's self-preservation because as soon as he catches them, either
I mean,
he's
he wants a
gone.
purpose.
Yeah. Well, he doesn't. I don't even know if it's so much a purpose. He wants a life. He wants to live, in general. I don't think he's like, oh, I need a mission. I need to live.
But
And the
doesn't
only
he
way this is
always
going
say
to
he
happen.
has a glorious purpose?
This was before he found everything out. I don't think he sees himself as someone who's burdened with glorious purpose anymore. I think he sees himself as I'm on a time limit. But basically, he needs to preserve his life because as soon as he helps catch the variant, what are they going to do with him? Delete him, do whatever.
Either
Because
delete him or just reset him back into his time.
right, and he doesn't want that because he knows his life is nothing. His life is meaningless, essentially. Right.
Well, I
in his
wonder if
mind.
that's why they, what their other option was going to be, no matter what. I feel like they would have just reset him and then put him back to where he was supposed to be with no memory of the TBA, and then continuing his purpose. But since Mobius needed him
Right.
to catch this other variant, they kept him. So,
Right, and I think you're right on that. But I think his intentions right now are how can I preserve my life to not be my glorious purpose that was basically an epic failure overall, if you think about it. Um, and then and that could come from either ruling the TVA or making a deal with the TVA or the timekeepers, I should say.
right.
Whether he rules time, I mean, how does one really rule time? He's not focused enough to rule time.
No.
He would do what he wanted to do. So I don't know if that's really what his goal is. I mean, to overthrow him, maybe, sure. So he can kind of escape into time over and over again, kind of like Zoom, who was trying to evade the time wraiths because he wasn't supposed to be there or something. Someone was like that in Flash. I don't remember.
I think it was Zoom.
Yeah, they weren't supposed to be there anymore in the timeline, so they kept jumping around trying to avoid them. It could be something like that he was planning. Is how can I dodge this for as long as I can?
So they all go back to 1985, which is where the variant was at the beginning of the episode. So Loki, Mobius, B-15, and a few other soldiers go back in time.
Mm-hmm.
And then they end up where all the bodies are at. But of course, you said C-20 was her name?
Hunter C-20 is what it says.
She wasn't there, but everybody else was dead. So they reset everything. One thing I did notice, though, just talking about the different types of Lokis, I did write down a few of them that they showed.
Mm-hmm.
So there's another version that's a frost giant version. If he had stayed with the frost giants, if Odin didn't take him, but he wasn't like a giant. He was normal Loki, but he was just blue.
That's really cool. I did not notice that.
Yeah. And then they had what I've heard around the internet is Tour de France Loki, because he has spandex on and he's holding a trophy.
See, that'd be cool if they could just kind of flash into those little like moments into like each of those like universes or whatever. We could actually see him act it out just for a moment instead of just standing there.
So great.
It would be because he's a fantastic actor.
So Loki asks him and goes, "Why can't we just go back to the point where the variant was at and stop the variant there?" And he says, "Because the Nexus events stabilizes the time flow." I'm not exactly sure what that means. Because
I'm not either.
Aren't Nexus events when they start branching off?
I think a Nexus event is where it can branch off. So it's like a threat, and then they go there, they make sure it doesn't hit the red line. And so if you go back, it just increases the chances of it exponentially.
Right. And then he says you need to show up in real time with branches that are still growing and changing because you can't go back before they show up because of that.
Which makes sense.
Yeah. So they basically have to go to I guess another. Maybe there's multiple timelines in that one timeline.
Well, I think, like you said, it starts to branch itself off, and I
Right,
think
but
that
he
could be it.
says you need to show up in real time with branches that are still growing and changing. So maybe there's multiple timelines in that one timeline that you see in like Endgame. Maybe there's multiple scenarios in that one timeline. So you have to go to one of those that's still continuing on.
Right. Well, still continue on that trend before it gets reset, essentially.
Right. So I thought it was interesting.
No, that is really interesting.
In the beginning, Loki plays and stalls Mobius and everybody, which I thought that was cool considering Mobius caught his little plan.
You know, actually, at first I thought maybe Loki was being sincere,
See,
and
I
that
thought the same
Mobius
thing.
was just calling him out because he thought that's what he was doing. But turns out that was the case the whole time.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty cool. So just before he gets to the library, Mobius goes and talks to I don't know what her name is. The main director lady.
Ravonna Renslayer?
Yes.
I think it's Ravana. Ravana? I'm not sure how to pronounce that.
But yeah, so the main director lady, they have a meeting in her office. And she said that Mobius is not the only TVA analyst working for her.
Which is kind of mysterious because they kept kind of alluding, like, are we going to see this person? Who is this person?
And a theory that I saw online was that it could possibly be Captain America. Because if you think about it, the timekeepers allowed Cap to go back in time, replace the stones, or put the stones back.
That's because that's what the timekeepers planned on them doing to begin with.
But they let him stay and go back in time and stay with Peggy until he got old. So maybe they made some sort of deal being like, look, I'll return these things and maybe I can do some work for you or something if you allow me to go back with the girl that I want to be with.
I would say no. Because I don't see Chris Evans wanting to do this for another 10 years. You can't.
Well, I don't
put
think
away
they're
Cap
show it.
in the.
Maybe they'll mention it.
Yeah, but that's such a cop out. You can't say like, oh hey, by the way, Tony Stark happens to work for us, and then not show Tony Stark. Like everyone wants to see that individual. And the fact they just got done with Falcon and the Winter Soldier and passing the mantle officially on to Sam, that would be such a. I mean, some people are like, well, he doesn't have to be Captain America. He can just be old Steve. It's like no one wants to see old Steve. We want to see young Steve. You know what I mean? Old Steve is old news.
Ageism.
Right? A little bit. But yeah, so for me, I'm just like, I do think it's someone that we're going to meet. What would be cool is if we found out it's actually the time variant themselves. Because remember, they kept concealing their own identity. Or maybe that's not how she normally looks. Or maybe when she's working for them, she looks like something else.
Maybe it's a different Loki. But she doesn't want to admit it because she keeps talking about how bad Loki is to Mobius.
Possibly.
So and maybe that's why she's...
Anything. Yeah, maybe. That could be why she's so against Loki to begin with.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very easily explained to say, well, why are you dealing with a variant when you should be just resetting them or whatever. But if there's something a little bit deeper to it, I think that'd be very intriguing, especially since it's someone... They weren't very clear, like, a name even. They didn't say name, just that there was another. It was like Yoda saying, no, there is another. You're like, well, who's the other? You gotta know. And so I think it's something we'll find out in the future episodes.
I'm sure we will. And then he signs something with a pen. And he looks at the pen and it says Franklin D. Roosevelt High School.
Wait, isn't that...
What does that have to do with the analyst?
Is that Peter Parker's high school?
I don't think so.
Okay, so this is what it's saying. Does FDR exist in the MCU? America's longest-serving president got a bizarre Marvel shout-out In Loki episode 2, after Morbius was handed a pen from Franklin D. Roosevelt High School during a meeting with his TVA boss, Ravonna, however you say it, Renslayer. It was blink and you miss it moment with some strange implications. But this could be more than just a fun Easter egg. Here's what Franklin D. Roosevelt High School means for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It says, like many other presidents, FDR has been an active figure in Marvel Universe. In the comics, he personally gave Captain America an upgraded shield. Well, there's your Captain
Right.
America reference there. His involvement with the Marvel movies is a little more tenuous, but it was seemingly confirmed in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., which is technically an MCU series and seems to be
It's
seeing a
in
resurgence of importance thanks to Loki. In Season 7, Episode 1 of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., so potential spoilers, episode The New Deal tells a story about Franklin Delano Roosevelt set shortly before he becomes president. At the time, he's still just governor of New York, but his agent Phil Coulson explains he's about to have a major impact on the MCU. He's elected president next year, and then a few later he forms the SSR. He explained. The SSR eventually becomes S.H.I.E.L.D., so maybe that's
right.
where that's coming from, which makes you wonder if that's from... Well, no, because the high school would be way after he was alive.
Hmm.
So let me see if I can kind of scroll down and see if it says anything about
I wonder if
Franklin
it's
D.
just like
Roosevelt.
a
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
nod to the comics because he's basically one of the main essential players of Shield. Well, from the 1940s in the Cap series.
But here's the thing: they don't do anything by chance. They don't do
No.
anything random. The fact they put it there is because there's a reason behind it. Now, according to this, it says that there is no reference to it in the Marvel comics, as far as whoever wrote the article knew. So I don't think it's related to that, but maybe it's upcoming to something else. For example, if they're going to do a high school version of Fantastic Four, maybe they went to Franklin D. Roosevelt, which I really hope they don't. They tried that and it did not work. It was a terrible film. The last Fantastic Four movie
Oh yeah.
was not very good.
No,
Um,
it was bad. The
yeah,
only good thing about that movie was Kate Mara.
she's all right. Um, I just didn't like that they went with the younger cast in general.
Yeah,
But
for sure.
back to this, they wouldn't show it if there wasn't a reason. So all we know about this mystery person is that they went to a high school.
Hmm.
Whether they worked there, they could be a principal at a high school. But I don't know how else. I mean, that's such an obscure thing to put, but very specific at the same time.
They've got to be planning something.
Yeah, it might be something we'll see in the future episodes. Like I said, it could be a hint. Like when we look back, we'll be like, "Oh wow, this makes perfect sense."
Yeah.
But as of right now, I'm at a loss. I've got nothing.
Okay. Well,
So, to be continued on that
yeah.
front.
If anybody has any theories of what that could mean, or if anybody has the inside scoop from Marvel, Kevin Feige, if you're listening,
Yeah,
let
this
me
is.
know.
I mean, he's got nothing else going on. We know that. But I did like kind of going back into the part of the episode where Loki asked Mobius how time is supposed to end, learning that basically they're unraveling the future from its infinite branches, while the TV protects what came before. So it's almost like they're
Mhm.
writing it as they go. So like, oh hey, how do we resolve this Thanos thing? Oh well, luckily we let Loki do the Avengers earlier. We'll do that.
But
Do the
he does say something along the lines of, but when everything is done, when the timekeepers say this is it, everybody is going to be basically in heaven. That's the essential from what I got from the episode, is that everybody meets in this grand place. There's no time, nothing. Everything is infinite, and you're just there, and that's it. And then time is done.
Yeah, I don't know about that. It's too simple.
It is too simple. That doesn't sound like Marvel.
No, and I mean, obviously, I think this is on paper what the timekeepers want, but it doesn't mean that's what's necessarily going to happen.
Right.
Do you think we'll actually see the timekeepers in this season?
Knowing how much there is to build up towards Spider-Man and uh, Multiverse of Madness, I mean, there's got to be a lot, especially if Loki does play a lot into that. We're going to have to see a lot more of what he does, especially with the TVA, because then you'll finally understand how we got to the point of the multiverse.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see how they do that. I did think it was a great thing when Mobius was thinking about the gum or the candy that he'd gotten from the kid,
Mm-hmm.
it back in the 16th century, and how they determined that, hey, this was almost like a breadcrumb or a clue that, this is going to be something that happens, that they need to find the variant within that timeline of, it looks like it was being sold between 2047 and 2051, so a 4-year span.
So
And
then
then
we end up
mhm.
getting to that scene in the library where they're looking for that specific.
Right. Well, then Loki's like, well, I would hide in, because he saw Ragnarok,
Mm-hmm.
which it has a spot that mentions Revengers, which I thought was a nice little Easter egg
Yeah.
in there. But it mentions Ragnarok, and at first I thought he was just thinking of like all the people he lost, and there was that brief moment it said like 900 and something people had died, and then he's like, wait a minute, actually, if I was going to do anything like this, if it was me, and it technically is, I would be hiding inside these apocalypse events.
Yeah, because no matter what you do, that is like everybody's supposed to die. Everything is supposed to get destroyed,
Yeah, and then they
no matter
decided to
what.
test it. And as soon as they went to the town where it was going to be Mount Vesuvius in Pompeii.
Yeah. And I don't mean to go back, but there was the part where he figures it out and he goes and talks to Mobius in the lunchroom and he steals this salad trying
Oh,
to
yes.
describe everything. The best part of that whole thing, and I feel like he's got a little bit of a bone to pick with the Hulk
Right, he
because
mentions the Hulk. Yeah.
he's like pushing the Hulk off of Rainbow Bridge.
But you got to remember, for him, the events of New York are still fresh in his mind. This isn't
Right.
him in Ragnarok where they teamed up technically. This is him
Yeah.
versus the Hulk. He's never teamed up with the Hulk, and all he
Mhm.
wants is a bit of vengeance, I think.
Yeah. So I thought that was just kind of a funny thing.
My thought was, though, if these guys were created supposedly by the TVA, they wouldn't need to eat because they're not real people, especially if there's no time. That time doesn't work the same way, because that's why we eat, right?
Right.
Is because we need to digest it, and then time happens, we digest it all the way out, and then we have to eat again to get more energy. So why was he eating in the first place? Bom, bom, bom.
Interesting. I
I
never
know
thought about
it was
that.
just a little thing that peeked in my head while I was watching it,
Well,
but
I
it
mean,
was a
if
very
everybody
funny
is
scene.
created in the TVA, I wonder if they created them like after humans.
But why waste the energy and resources to create fake food and give them time to eat food, or fake time to eat food? It felt like it was just there to serve the purpose that he could do the salt and pepper thing and ruin his lunch.
Hmm.
Like, it was more for the humorous effect rather than the plausible effect. Again, when you do
Right.
time travel, anything like that, it just gets crazy. But
Yeah, everything is weird.
time travel's bullshit. Basically,
Oh
anything
yeah.
time travel's bullshit. Terminator, bullshit. Back to the Future, bullshit. It wouldn't work that way, but it's fun, and you just have to suspend belief.
Mm-hmm.
And
Just
that was,
have an open mind about everything. I
yeah,
mean, that's the
it's be
whole
along for
fun
the ride.
about being a geek, you know? You have an
Mm-hmm.
open mind, you get to fantasize what goes on, what could possibly happen. Like, that's the whole point
Right.
of this podcast, man. Like,
Yeah.
we thrive on stuff like this. So, I
I know. I
mean,
like how we're like, I'm saying, does he really need to be eating a salad? But I'm not saying, but is there really timekeepers that has determined the fate of every living being?
yeah,
That's plausible, but not a salad. Okay.
somebody find us an answer. We're
I
confused
know.
over here.
Um, but yeah, so that it was a really funny scene though, because he totally ruined his salad. That'd be
Yeah,
way too much
seriously.
seasoning.
And he like goes over to the other table and it's Casey.
Oh yeah, he's like, oh hey, how's it going, or something like that. He has like a little interaction. Tom Hiddleston, of course, kills it.
He's
Even though this is
so
a
good.
newer version of Loki than what we're used to at all. Like, this is
Yeah,
a very
definitely.
different version. I think he is slightly humbled and everything, but
Mm-hmm.
I do really like that he was the one to be like, "Oh, this is what I would do. This must be what happened," and that's how it should. I mean, that's how well written it was to
Yeah,
make that happen. So, that's my 2 cents.
that's a good 2 cents. But yeah, so they go to
Anything else to say
Pompeii.
about?
Pompeii, uh, and it's funny how they're like sitting behind a wall and he's like, just make a sound of a bird. It's like, what?
Right.
He's like, just act like a bird. And so of course he runs out there being Loki and making this huge thing.
That says, "Oh, you're all gonna die," and then all of a sudden the volcano erupts. And,
Yeah.
um, But it was a perfect point, and then of course Mobius sees that hey, there was some of that aura, energy residual, whatever they call it,
Hmm.
special energy that shows that he was right.
That nothing happens.
Right, that nothing will change. It'll be the
Yeah.
exact same, and so that it just leaves credibility to Loki's theory of what he would do, which
Right.
is hiding among different apocalyptic events. And that's where I think they find out about the Rock's Cart superstore. It'll be interesting to see how they play it in the future seasons because Loki has been confirmed to have multiple seasons. If this is going to end on, say, a cliffhanger, which I don't see happening as much
I don't think
due
it
to
might.
it supposed to be tying in with Doctor Strange, but maybe at the very end. But maybe he meets the Timekeepers at the end of the season, having completed the task with whatever the variant in some fashion or another, and he then before like the doors open or whatever it's going to be, and before we actually see their faces in season, which gives them enough time to kind of decide how they want them to look. I mean, we've seen statues and cartoon pictures of it in the MCU, but that would be a cool way to end the season. Would be for them to have him complete his goal because he's on a journey, and also I want to see how Loki gets back to the main Marvel universe because if he doesn't come back to the main universe, it's all kind of moot. You know what I mean? Like,
Hmm.
we want to see these characters go off on separate journeys and then come together in dramatic fashions.
Yeah, definitely.
But then they go to the Roxcart Superstore where there's a big hurricane, I think it is. It's going to
Yeah, it's
take
going to be
down the
another.
city.
It's another apocalypse that's going to happen. They figured out that's where the variant's going to be, so that's where they track her down. But yeah, there's a big storm going on. Um, Alabama, I think, is what it said. What I what I think is really funny about that scene is when they walk through the portal or they walk through the door, and everybody's all soaking wet, and Loki uses magic to dry his clothes off. She's like, "What was that?" And he's like, "I just used magic to dry my clothes off." He's
Right.
like, "I don't want to be squeaking around in my boots like you guys."
Yeah, no, he's got some great one-liners
It's
in the
great.
series so far. I mean, and that's I think his persona of Loki really came to fruition in the Avengers with Joss Whedon's
Definitely.
writing, and then they've just tried to continue that trend since because I don't feel like he was the same. He didn't have the same kind of one-liners that were great in Thor, but everything
Hmm.
since then, ever since Avengers, he's great. Um, I like that when they went there, that he ends up. Um, there was a man standing there, I believe it was right at a count at like a aisle,
Yeah.
and he was
Oh, and the guy's looking for like a plant.
yeah, and then all of a sudden, like the touch thing happens, and the person's enchanted, and they're just like talking to him. He's like, "Oh, this is me, I presume," or something like that. That
Yeah,
was a really great
like the
line.
guy touches B-15's arm and uh, kind of transfers that mind control over to her, which I think is kind of a cool part of her power, is that she can just continuously transfer it from person to person.
I think it was really cool because yeah, it shows that she can only control one person at a time. So it sets
Hmm.
a rule, which is very important to me in any kind of um,
Like,
storytelling, any
yeah,
type of
or
sandbox, like Star Wars. There's things the Force can do, there's things the Force can't. Sometimes they'll introduce new power, that's fine. But if they broke said power, it'd be different.
yeah,
And so
definitely.
by setting the clear rules that hey, the variant can only control one person at a time, I like that because also it means that it's not as strong of an ability as
Yeah,
we thought.
I like when they come up with different abilities and they come up basically with a flaw for that ability, which I think every superhero needs. Not one person can be super indestructible and not be able to die in some way. Like even Superman specifically, yes, he's indestructible by pretty much anything from anywhere except kryptonite. So of
Yeah.
course he's got that weakness, which I think is cool. But I mean, I think every power is like that. Even the movie Jumper, where they can teleport,
Mhm.
but they have to have that image clearly in their mind. Otherwise, they get stuck between a wall or something.
Yeah, see, I hate it when there's like, I'm gonna bring up something terrible. I've only seen this movie once, guys. Okay, don't make fun of me. Twilight, like it just felt like they just had unlimited powers. It was like he's climbing up the tree like a monkey, and then they can't play baseball because they're too strong. Are you
Yeah,
serious?
no
They
kidding.
can't do 50%. Nothing.
They
Like
have no
super,
control over
they
their
have no
strength.
control over their strength. I'm too strong. I open a door handle, the door comes off. You know, it's like it's ridiculous. But with something like this, where they're creating these rules and they're following these rules, that's very important to me in storytelling in general as a storyteller.
Yeah, definitely.
So when I see shows like Twilight, I'm just like, this is ridiculous. We can't go out because we're too shiny.
Because
Wear
they're
a
too shiny.
hat.
Because they
Get some,
sparkle.
get some sunblock.
Anyway, we're gonna
Sorry.
use some sunblock. Maybe use some like toner or something.
Something. Just
Get
put
a,
on
get
mud.
a,
Put on
get
mud.
a spray tan or something.
Yeah. Wear a mask. They can come out on Halloween. That's it. Oh, this is just makeup.
Yeah. So they eventually, after that whole scene, Loki meets the variant via mind control, and then she takes over another worker,
Mm-hmm.
um, and then B-15 falls to the ground, obviously passes out, and then they start talking. They continue to talk, but then it goes to another scene where Mobius and everybody finds,
C20.
or I guess before that happens, they find C20 and she's mumbling. She's repeating, "It's real."
And that she revealed the top secret location of the timekeepers to
Right. But what is she
her.
referring to though? Meaning it's real is like,
Yeah, so we find a catatonic C20, and basically she realizes and reveals that she
gave up the
surrendered the
location.
information, yeah, the location of the timekeepers to
Yeah.
the variant. And then Loki then comes face to face with them, who reveals herself as like a female Loki.
Yeah, she reveals herself through another person.
Right. And then,
But she's human.
right, so then we see her as a female Loki. The timer expires and her reset charges are sent scattered across the timeline, causing a wide array of branching timelines, which might be something that isn't resolved even by the end of the season. And maybe that's how the multiverse part is affiliated or associated with Multiverse of Madness. And the TVA is startled by the mass occurrences of the Nexus events, forcing all units into action. And then my favorite scene of this whole show, because again, this whole episode, I was pretty much like, he doesn't seem like Loki. He doesn't seem like Loki. And I was kind of like, well, I know why, but it just didn't feel like Loki. And then she opens up a time door, and everyone's like trying to give chase of Mobius, and everyone's saying, "Hey, don't go in there, don't go in there." And then he jumps through,
Right.
and then they end it, which is perfect because it's like, did he do it because he's trying to chase her, or did he do it because he's trying to team up with her?
Or maybe they're in my head, I'm thinking, oh, maybe he's making Mobius and the other TVA agents think, oh, maybe he betrayed us, but maybe, maybe that's what we want to think. Instead, he does the opposite. He tries to capture her or goes
Right.
behind her back, maybe teaming up or something, and then eventually going behind her back. I don't know.
Right, or tries to gain her trust, yeah, and then like backstab her
Right.
and get her caught because he wants. Again, I think his number one goal right now is self-preservation, and he knows that she's his ticket to get to the timekeepers to bargain for his life. That's how I see it. I could be wrong because they haven't exactly explained that clearly, which is fine. It's meant to be a is he good, is he bad kind of situation.
Yeah.
But I think him going through the door was perfect because it was still a bit of Loki. Like, I'm going to do it my way.
Right.
Regardless of how it is, he's not following everyone's rules. He's doing things his way.
Yeah. Which I think is kind of a cool aspect to go from.
Yeah, and I thought it was a great ending to the episode. It left me wanting to see what happened in episode 3.
Yeah. That whole scene though, when the bombs go through the little portals, and then all of a sudden you just see those branches just.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be interesting. Guaranteed one of those is going to hit the red line.
Has to. I'd like to see multiple because then you're having the multiverse somehow maybe be connected to that way, but I don't know.
I'm not sure, but I'm excited to see what happens.
Me too. Me too. But I think that this episode is great because it showed how Loki could work within the TVA but still do things his own way, and we'll see kind of how it goes from there. Obviously they're not going to kill him off by the end of the season, so something has to keep him alive. Whether that's now he has to go back and save all the different the timelines that have been hitting red lines, or what. I think the TVA and Loki are going to be something going into even season 2. However it pans out, my prediction is not going to be like Loki season 2 has nothing to do with TVA. I think TVA is going to be heavily involved.
Oh, definitely. But if any of you have any theories, comments, throw them in the comment section.
Mm-hmm.
Like, subscribe, share the
share.
information, share the page. Like us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. You can follow us on Anchor, on YouTube, all at Infinity Nerd Pod. But yeah, go ahead, show us, tell us your theories. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in and listening, and we'll see you next time. And until then, nerd on.